On April 28, 2026, the global energy market was shaken by an announcement that many industry experts had long feared but few expected to see so soon. The United Arab Emirates officially declared its withdrawal from the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, better known as OPEC. Effective May 1, 2026, this decision ended decades of cooperation and signaled a massive shift in how one of the world's most influential oil producers views its future. For years, the UAE has been a cornerstone of OPEC, often acting as a stabilizing force alongside its neighbors. However, the world has changed rapidly over the last few months. Between shifting economic goals and the regional instability caused by the recent conflicts in early 2026, the UAE has decided that its path forward no longer aligns with the restrictions imposed by the group. This move isn't just a minor policy change, it is a fundamental redirection of national strategy that could rewrite the rules of the global economy. In today's video, we are going to break down exactly why this happened, what it means for the future of oil prices, and how a combination of multi-billion-dollar investments and a devastating regional war pushed the UAE to make this choice. It's a complex situation with no easy answers, so we'll look at the facts from all sides. Before we dive into the details, if you find these kinds of deep dives helpful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep creating objective content like this. To understand why this is such a big deal, we first have to look at what OPEC actually does. Essentially, OPEC is a group of oil-producing nations that work together to manage the supply of oil on the world market. By agreeing to limit how much oil each member produces, they can prevent the market from being oversupplied, which keeps prices high enough to support their national budgets. For a long time, the UAE was the quiet partner in this arrangement, holding the second largest spare production capacity in the group right after Saudi Arabia. When other countries like Qatar or Angola left OPEC in the past, the market barely blinked. Those countries were relatively small producers, but the UAE is different. It is a heavyweight. With its departure, OPEC's share of global oil production has officially dropped below 30% for the first time in its history. This is a psychological and practical blow to the organization. When a group controls less of the market, it loses its pricing power, the ability to influence how much you pay at the pump or how much factories pay for fuel. So, why leave now? The most immediate reason is purely economic. Over the last decade, the UAE has invested tens of billions of dollars into its energy infrastructure. They didn't just want to maintain their oil fields, they wanted to revolutionize them. Their goal is to reach a production capacity of 5.5 million barrels per day by 2030. However, being an OPEC member meant they were bound by production quotas. To put it simply, imagine you own a massive factory capable of producing 1,000 cars a day, but a committee tells you that you are only allowed to sell 500. All that expensive machinery is sitting idle, and the money you spent building it isn't being recouped. The UAE reached a point where they felt the opportunity cost. The money they were losing by not selling that extra oil was simply too high to ignore. They believe they are losing billions of dollars every year by keeping their taps half closed. There is also a concept in the energy world known as peak oil demand. For decades, the worry was about running out of oil. Today, the worry is that the world will stop wanting it. With the global transition toward electric vehicles and renewable energy, the UAE views the next decade as the golden window to sell what they have. Their philosophy is straightforward. If the world is eventually going to move away from oil, it is better to sell as much as possible now, while the price is still high, rather than leaving it in the ground where it might become worthless in 30 years. However, we cannot talk about this decision without addressing the elephant in the room, the geopolitical climate of 2026. The conflict that broke out in February 2026 between the United States, Israel, and Iran had a catastrophic impact on the region. One of the most significant consequences was the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. For those unfamiliar with the geography, the strait is a narrow waterway through which about a fifth of the world's oil passes. When it closed, Gulf exports were effectively trapped. The UAE's infrastructure also suffered during this period, and the national economy took a hit. In the wake of such a conflict, the government needs immediate liquidity, cash on hand, to rebuild, support its citizens, and stabilize its financial reserves. The production limits imposed by OPEC became a cage that the UAE could no longer afford to stay in. By leaving the group, they have regained the sovereignty to produce and sell as much oil as they can transport, providing a much-needed boost to their treasury during a time of recovery. Another point of friction was the baseline issue. In OPEC terms, a baseline is the starting number used to calculate how much a country should cut its production. The UAE has long argued that its baseline was outdated and didn't reflect its true modern capacity. They felt they were being asked to cut more than their fair share compared to countries that hadn't invested as much in their own industries. Despite years of negotiations, this sense of unfairness persisted, eventually reaching a breaking point. Now, what does this mean for the rest of the world? In the short term, the impact on oil prices has been somewhat muted, mostly because the Strait of Hormuz remains a logistical nightmare. Even if the UAE wants to sell more oil, getting it to market is still a challenge. But as we look toward 2027, the medium-term outlook becomes much more uncertain. There are two main scenarios that analysts are watching. In the first scenario, Saudi Arabia and the remaining OPEC members try to absorb the blow. They might choose to cut their own production even further to balance out the extra oil the UAE will eventually bring to the market. This would keep prices stable, but it would be a bitter pill for Saudi Arabia to swallow, as they would essentially be losing market share to their neighbor. The second, more volatile scenario is a price war. If OPEC feels that the UAE is acting as a free rider, meaning they benefit from the high prices OPEC maintains without doing any of the work to keep them there, the organization might decide to flood the market with oil to drive prices down. The goal would be to make oil so cheap that it hurts the UAE's profits, forcing them back to the negotiating table. We saw a version of this in 2020, and it resulted in a total collapse of oil prices. Beyond the numbers, there is a deeper fear, the contagion effect. If the UAE proves that a country can leave OPEC and thrive on its own, other members might follow. If a few more mid-sized producers decide to exit, the organization could face a total collapse of influence. This would move us into a world of every nation for itself, where oil prices are determined entirely by the open market rather than a central committee. The UAE's decision is a calculated gamble. They are betting that their advanced technology, high capacity, and lower production costs will allow them to outcompete others in a more crowded market. It is a move away from the collective security of a bloc and toward a future defined by national competition and rapid monetization of resources. As the world watches the UAE begin its journey as an independent producer, we are left to wonder if we are seeing the beginning of the end for the era of managed oil markets. The transition to clean energy is already changing how we use power, but this political shift might change who controls the wealth behind that power. Given everything we've discussed, from the economic need for cash after the war to the long-term goal of maximizing production before demand drops, do you think the UAE made the right move for its future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.